Right now, I'm thrilled to welcome Bella Fleck and Abigail Washburn to Q. Hi, guys.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I know it sounds like we just started talking, but really, we've been hanging out for a while, and it's been a real pleasure having you in here. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the songs like that. I think I got that vibe a lot in the record, more than I have in past records. First, though, I want to point out, if you're listening to this on the radio, we're sitting down with banjos. My banjo's in a stand.
Waiting.
Waiting patiently. Abigail collecting dust. Abigail has her banjo in her hands. Bela has his banjo in his hand. You play in two very different styles of banjo. Bela, you play the more three-finger. How would you describe it?
Well, I would just say it comes down from Earl Scruggs, who's the guy who figured out how to revolve his thumb and his index and his middle finger over the 5 strings wearing picks.
Can you give us a little example?
Yeah. So the whole idea is we've got 5 strings on the banjo, but by rotating these 3 fingers, you can make a very fast sound with very little effort. And that's without the left hand at all. So once you add the left hand, so I come out of that style, and then I've kind of done my own thing with it, also building on the work of a lot of people that have been expanding that style ever since it started, in the 40s, basically becoming really well known.
I'll say this, if you're listening to this, what maybe Earl Scruggs was to Bela is to most of us. Like he is an incredibly iconic figure in the history of the banjo. Abigail, you play a very
Do you
different...
want Canadian money or American money?
Where's the exchange rate today, Bela? Is that Abigail, you play, we'll say, like a claw hammer or more of an old-time frailing style. How would you describe it?
Yeah, the style that I play is...
She's a frailier.
Waka waka.
I'm going to sell that in a shirt.
That is kind of great.
Yeah, it's pretty good, actually, isn't it?
I love being with banjo nerds. So my style's more closely connected to the way the banjo was played in West Africa before it even came to America. There's an instrument that called the akanting that is actually in a film that Bela made, and this is how I learned about it. Bela made a wonderful film when he went to Africa and met people who played instruments that are thought of as origin instruments for the banjo.
And
American money for you, right?
Yeah. And I remember you jammed with him. I've seen that doc.
Correct.
Abigail, can you give us a little example of what you're
show us.
talking about here?
So it's a strike down with the first finger and then a pull off on the left hand on the neck with my middle finger.
And she's using raw fingernails. She's not using picks.
I have no picks, yeah.
It's just fingernails.
Or acrylic nails that I get done at the salon. And then a strike down with the middle string, with the middle finger on the first string, and then a pull off on the thumb string, on the drone string. This is what the basic roll sounds like.
Now, one thing that both of these styles have in common is that if you're doing it right, they don't take a whole lot of effort.
Right.
So you can really race. And the trick has been putting them together because they don't normally go together.
Well, I was going to say they don't normally go together. In fact, they tend to, at least in my experience, live in two completely different worlds. Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is it about the combination of these two banjo styles together that's so appealing to you?
Really, it's just that we started dating.
It's the sex.
It did, but it did feel like the Montagues and the Capulets a little bit, like an old time player and a bluegrass player coming together. I guess we can all continue to laugh at that.
Well, to me, I'll just tell you how I look at it, which is, well, first of all, the first time we actually started playing together was at a family gathering where Abby's grandmother said, "You both play the banjo. Play something for us." And we're like, "Oh, we don't play together." And she said, "Yes, you do. You're both musicians. Play something." So we just started playing, and we discovered. What did we play the first time? I think we might have played Sparrow or something. What did we play? Something. But something from Abby's repertoire that I'd heard her do, and then it was just like, "Oh, this actually sounds kind of cool," and it was a surprise to us how natural it was.
And then my grandmother set up a show for us at her church.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
She said, "You're doing a show for us." And so we said, "Okay, all right, Grandma." So the day before, we started trying to figure out what we could do together. and it's surprising how easy it was. And not only that, we discovered we were actually had a lot of fun on stage together with just the two of us.
Yeah.
And that's so. Then when we had we got pregnant. When we got pregnant,
Yeah, Bela did the hard work.
I did the hard work.
I'm learning.
We decided to go on the road together because we didn't want to be apart from our family. This family we're creating, and of course I've been on the road for a long time. And
How
I've
long
seen,
for you now?
How long have I been on the road
Yeah.
now? Over an hour. Well, I started playing professionally around 1976.
Yeah.
So I've been pretty much rolling since then.
So the road is kind of home for you.
Well, wherever Abby and Juno are is home for me now. So I know that sounds very cheesy, but
sounds very
it's
sweet,
the
actually,
truth.
doesn't
It's very
It's the
true.
truth. And a lot of my friends have suffered with the problem of having children and then going on the road and being gone and missing a lot of the childhood. And so we didn't want to do it that way. If we were going to have a kid, we decided that was the time we should start trying to play together as a duo. And then that became the impetus for, okay, what can we do with these instruments? And then I started looking into, well, Abby was already playing the cello banjo, which is a nice low banjo, which we don't have with us today. But I started looking into other different kinds of banjos, so we could have different sounds for different songs, and it wouldn't be the same. We would look for ways to vary it. And then we hit the road, and we've been on the road with Juno pretty much since he was 3 months old, doing shows when we tour together. And that's most of what I've been doing, and most of what you've been doing, right?
Yeah.
If you're just tuning in, my name's Tom Power. I'm speaking with Bela Fleck and Abigail Washburn on Q. They have a new record out called Echo in the Valley. So let's talk a little bit about it. First off, it's almost entirely just you guys and your banjos. Each of you have played in bands. Each of you have played with some of the best musicians, the best caliber musicians in the respective genres that you play in. Why did you decide to do it just the two of you?
Because there's only two of us in the band.
You know what I mean, though?
No, we liked the idea of having limitations on the record.
Yeah.
And the idea that we could play a whole concert, just two banjos. It felt like a wonderful challenge, actually.
But also, I think there's this tendency to look down on the banjo and tell jokes about it. But the truth is, one banjo by itself is a very complex, as you know, is a very complex and interesting sound. And the more instruments you add doesn't necessarily highlight. In fact, it tends to hide all of those harmonics and those rich overtones that start to happen. But when we're sitting next to each other playing our banjos together, the banjos seem to sparkle with each other. And again, the more things we add, the less that happens. So two banjos is actually enough. And people often will tell us when they hear the record, they'll say, it sounds like there's a bunch of you guys. We'll say, well, it's just the two of us. It's just all the things that happen when these two different styles interact.
I love the idea of a record being a record, like a record of time,
Yes.
as opposed to being like a creation, it's something that takes
Production.
a production of a lot of different things. This is it seems like a record of
And
what
we've
you guys
been a
are
part
doing
of
right
both.
now.
And
Yeah.
this has been a really exciting way to approach a minimal yet very full and present sound.
There's a couple of tracks that stuck out to me, and I want to talk about one of them. I was surprised, maybe a little bit, but maybe I shouldn't have been, to see a certain political undercurrent or a more humanistic undercurrent. You mentioned that song about Syrian refugees, about Syrians crossing over. I want to talk also about Come All You Coal Miners. It's a traditionally sung song. It was from the singing of I can't remember her name right now.
Oh, Sarah Ogan Gunning.
And the song has the line towards the end, coal miner, won't you wake up, open your eyes and see what the dirty capitalist system is doing to you and me. Abigail, tell me about including that song.
Well, I'll just say one thing. The first time we did this song, Abby's been knowing this song for a long time, and we were playing in West Virginia, and there had been this terrible calamity there, ecological calamity there, where the river was just made into a sewer, and everybody was getting sick from the water. And Abby decided bravely that night she would sing this song a cappella to this audience of people that had, were going through this.
This is coal country too, right?
Yeah, this is the center.
Deep
yeah,
in coal country, yeah.
And it was a very interesting experience. Of course, it's not our song, but it was something. Ever since she did it that night, she's pretty much done it every show because it's felt like such a powerful piece of music from a woman's perspective. But I just wanted to remind you of that
Yeah,
first
that's
time.
right.
How did it go that night when you sang it?
It was about half awkward silence and half tremendous ecstatic cheers.
How'd that make you feel?
I don't know. A lot of times, so I'm drawn to this music so deeply because of the voices of the past. And I feel really drawn to understanding the past and how it should inform our future. And that's why I love this old style of music. And I especially love the voices of women, elder women, who are trying to pass along the stories to us of the truth of human trials and tribulations that have been happening for centuries. And so I like to listen, and I like to share and channel those voices with people. And this voice felt really important to me when I heard it, when I heard Sarah Ogun-Gunning singing on a recording. I never got to meet her in person. She died in the 80s, but she was discovered as a part of the folk revival late in her life. But she was born and raised in coal camps in the 1920s and 30s, and had a dreadful experience. And she wanted to share with the world about it. And so no, that's not true. She didn't want to share with the world about it. I want to share it with the world.
Yeah.
She just wrote those songs for herself and for her family and for her community.
She wanted to tell the story.
She wanted to tell the story of
Yeah.
what she was living and
I
what she
think
was feeling.
She
It
was
was very
singing-
personal.
She was also singing out to the coal miners themselves.
It's
Why
true.
don't you? She was actually a firebrand, fighting for everybody to wake up and look at what's going on. The rich people are on the hill. We're dying down here.
Mm-hmm.
No one's taking care of us. If we don't take care of ourselves, no one will do it for us. So it's a very brave song. And so for all of those reasons, it's felt like a really good thing to
And
do.
this dynamic is nothing new. And
Yeah.
it's it may not be happening in the same way in the coal camps throughout Appalachia right now, although there are some atrocities happening around coal. But it's happening around the world. And that's part of the reason we titled our record Echo in the Valley, because there are these echoes from the past that are constantly trying to tell us, we've been here before. There's a better way to do it. Let's move on. Let's find something new.
Well, two questions on that. One, Abigail, I know you have a background in the law. You studied, or you were a lawyer for a while. Is that
I was
right?
going to study law, but I worked in government for 3 years in Vermont.
Yeah, and you lived in China for a while.
And I lived in China off and on and worked with a public relations firm. And
So that would seem to me like we'll say very traditional advocacy work, or it could translate itself to very traditional
Sure.
advocacy work, either through the law or through your time in China. What can you do as a musician? What voice do you have as a musician that's greater or different than more traditional activist avenues?
I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
But I believe that sharing music feels extremely universal. It feels cellular. It doesn't require the intellect. I mean, some words call out the intellect, like the word capitalism, which is a surprising word for Sarah Ogun-Gunning to have thrown into that song. But I think it speaks to the heart. It speaks to the inner mind. Of this deep knowing about our connection to the earth, to one another, that we are this interconnected web of souls that need to and are driven and compelled to think with a collective mind about our future.
We had a great songwriter named Rostam Batmanglij on recently, and he said songs can bypass the brain and hit the central nervous system.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've seen, and Abby has seen a lot in our international experiences, is that the music can melt people's hearts that are not inclined to like you, but a room full of people can have a shared experience that changes all of their perspective and softens their perspective towards people that they're.
Yeah, I had this one time in China where I was coming into a situation where I was on a tour of the Silk Road with a band, a 5-piece band, and we were going from Beijing all the way out to Kashgar. And it was supported by the U.S. State Department and the Chinese Cultural Bureau. So we'd call ahead to the local cultural bureaus and ask if we could collaborate with local people. It just seemed like the most effective way to really get involved with someone locally. And so we did it several times, and then this one night, an old master erhu player showed up, which is like the 2-string Chinese fiddle. And he did not look happy about it. And he came into the room and I said, 您好, 我们很荣幸有机会跟你一起合作. We're so honored to have the chance to work with you. And he said, 中国人和美国人不能合作. He said, Americans and Chinese simply can't work together, implying we're just too different.
Mhm.
I said, well, that may be true, but why don't you just play for us? Because we think your instrument's beautiful and we'd love to hear you play. And so he started playing for us. And the whole band just listened and slowly tuned our instruments into the right pitch, the right timbre to play with him. And we just started droning underneath him. And it sounded beautiful. And you could tell he thought so too, because he started to almost smile. And then at the end of it, I started singing a song in the same pitch and started the same key, and he started playing along. And that night we performed for 1,400 people in Lanzhou. And afterwards, he said that he had learned that music it wasn't about Chinese or Americans. It was about hearts connecting. That music is about hearts connecting.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, it was a really neat night.
It's interesting because Bela, I've been a fan of yours for a very, very long time, and the circles that you have found yourself playing in, I'll say for the most part, I won't say exclusively, have been maybe relatively apolitical in the music that's been made, especially
Right.
in bluegrass, in newgrass, some of this has to do with it's largely instrumental music, but does this feel like stepping outside a little bit to you? Does it feel feels like
does.
something different?
It does, and it felt like the right time. But in general, I think I've avoided any political stance, not because I don't have one, but because I don't think it's fair for someone who has a podium to have more influence than the person that's sitting in the audience. Like, why should I get to push my agenda? That being said, I deeply respect musicians who do. So it's kind of a weird thing to try and figure out where you sit, especially as an instrumentalist. And so where I could do a benefit, or I could do something like go to Africa and point out that banjo is an African instrument, or play with musicians from around the world and hope that promotes unity. I guess the truth is, with this record, it was more about we're writing songs together for the first time, Abigail and I. The last album, we really didn't have time because we had a new baby and we just did a lot of things that were pretty easy to do quick. This time we're writing songs, and I really wanted them to reflect the reality that we lived in and show our point of view. Because if you don't share who you are in a song, or your point of view in a song, it usually isn't a very good song. But it just felt like the right time because, well, for me, I was very upset by what happened with the election and things like that. And, there could be a lot of, I know there are a lot of people that love banjo music who thought it was a perfect election. That was exactly what they would want. And it's not like I want to run them off and turn off a bunch of people who liked me before because I take such a strong view. But I'm just starting to realize that we're not all that fragile. Like we can in the States, in other words, I'm getting to know a lot of people that voted Republican for Trump and stuff, and finding they're still coming to shows and they still like what we do. It's not like, if I can't get along with everybody, then how can I be upset with other people for not doing the same?
I have trouble calling it a political stand because I think of that often as choosing parties, and this record for me more is about my concern for humanity. That's for me. That's what it's about.
I think that's why at the beginning I was trying to say there are certain words like this capitalist system that evoke a certain political mindset.
We thought carefully about. We really went back and forth about whether that was too strong a statement to make, and in the end we decided that we just liked the song too much to not use it.
Share her voice,
and ultimately it's extremely powerful. You mentioned you've been on the road now for a while with Juno.
Yes, our little boy.
How old's Juno?
He's 4.5. And we adore him.
Two or three banjos and a child.
I think it's more like eight banjos.
8 banjos.
So that's a noisy house.
There's a lot more at home. I thought you just meant on the bus.
Well, it's a noisy bus. How's that going?
Oh, we have this wonderful, what we call our bus family. So we have Helen, who takes care of all of us and always makes sure Gino is well cared for, and Bebop or Josie and Richard. They're all out there in the booth, and between all of us, I think we create a family on the road that feels really nurturing and warm and beautiful. I think it's a lot of love.
And honestly, one of the things Abby and I said to each other when we did our vows was, we'll have an unconventional life together.
Yeah.
It was written into our vows, and so all these folks that we're with are getting dragged into our unconventional life. Basically,
You should assign them in too.
yeah, they weren't part of that, but they are now.
Do you think Juno's going to be a 3-finger or a claw hammer?
Oh,
We've discovered when you
discovered.
blend, when you mate a 3-finger player and a claw hammer player, you get a golfer.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah, it's a good thing to know.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure. Before we go to the last song, when I was 17, my family bought me a ticket to fly to Montreal to see Wilco, to see the Blind Boys of Alabama, and Mavis Staples to see Bela Fleck, Jean-Luc Ponty, and Stanley Clark at a big theater in Montreal. And I ran into Bela earlier and it was like meeting Bela was like meeting Frank Sinatra for me. Like all I was doing was playing the banjo. So I met you and I said, hey, I think you were buying socks. And I said, hey, how's it going? I'm Tom. It's nice to meet you. You said, hey, it's nice to meet you. And then you said, I didn't know what to say to you because I was so nervous. And I said, Bela, is it going to be a good show tonight? And you said, well, God, I hope so. I certainly hope it is, but thank you for coming. And then that night on stage, you said, are there any banjo players in the audience? And it was a big theater, and only one person applauded, and I think it was me. And you said, well, this goes out to that banjo player I met at the mall earlier today. And that was me, and it really changed everything for me. It was a huge moment for me.
I think you're getting me confused with Frank Sinatra.
But I think our producers have been giving me a hard time all week about how excited I am to have you guys both
Thank
in.
you so much.
I've been a fan of all your bands, of Abigail of Uncle Earl, and your past records, and the Flecktones, and it's a pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.